All right, good afternoon, Dad.
Good morning.
Good morning for me. Good job. Okay, today is
Okay.
Monday, July 28th, and let me start you with this. How screwed is Trump right now?
Well, okay, I guess if you look at the polls, yeah, he's in bad shape. His approval ratings have been dropping. He's well underwater right now, especially among young people. So, a lot of young Republicans that would uh, have turned against him. I mean, maybe not a lot, but a significant percentage. This is a problem. Um, Now, the only bright side of the situation for him is actually that when you look at the Democrats, they're doing even worse. According to recent polls, the approval for the Democrats is at rock bottom. I think it's maybe lower than it ever has been. And if you exclude Trump from the equation, actually Republicans are doing better than Democrats. So he does have problems, but his, potential opposition, the Democrats, yeah, we're talking about in a little over a year, we're going to have the midterm elections. Uh, he might survive them. Typically, the opposition party does well in the midterm elections, but it may not be a disaster. He might come through. Again, it's too early to say. Um, but Epstein continues to hurt him. I think that's done permanent damage. As I said last time, it's something that just won't go away. People are not satisfied with the non-responses that they've been getting from him and from his administration. In a way, maybe as I've tried to point out earlier, I think it's the more rational thing, would be to be actually condemning him, for example, for his connection with APAC and all these things that we're talking about that are out in the open. And that hasn't hurt him. It should have hurt him. People really are understanding what's going on, and they look at it and they see his relationship with these powerful Zionist groups. Um, they know what's going on. And now Epstein, though, is something that,
But that's everybody,
eh, okay,
right?
right.
All,
Well,
all of
what
Congress, we see like 99% are on their payroll, right?
for
It's
APAC, yeah, that's true. That's true.
right.
Right. Both Democrats and Republicans. That's true. Yeah. Um, yeah, but you could say the same thing for Epstein. That's true. It hurts Trump because he seems to be covering up for it. And he made a point about going after him. That was part of what got him elected. He was the guy that was going to drain the swamp. And then he gets there and he starts protecting swamp creatures. And you could say Exhibit A in among swamp creatures is Jeffrey Epstein. And he's not protecting him. Jeffrey Epstein is gone, but covering up this case. And people are very upset. That's true. So it hurts him in particular, and it will continue to hurt him.
I'm just wondering more like how dangerous do you think this is going to make Trump? If he is severely damaged, if this really is sinking his presidency, and anything that he tweets out, you just see it on X. They'll be like, "Oh, look, we did something," what insert whatever, and then
Yeah.
the top responses will be like, "We don't care. Release the Epstein files." Like as
Right.
long as if that keeps on happening, then how dangerous does this make the situation for the whole world? If they don't release it, because then the longer that this goes on, the more and more that people will come to the conclusion that Trump is either a pedophile or he's protecting pedophiles, or there's something really bad that they got on him, and then that's why this is going on. So it makes it. I feel like this is what will lead us to war, and it's just so crazy that this might happen.
Yeah.
Do you think
Right.
that?
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Well,
Or
it's certainly a possibility. Sure. It's often foreign policy decisions are driven by domestic political concerns. That's actually it's more common than we want to admit. Um, but it's there. It's actually there's no reason to believe that it couldn't happen again. Again, I don't know where he really has freedom to act, though, that will help him. Maybe we just don't know. There are gambles that he can take, but that could backfire. Escalation in Ukraine, another war against Iraq. But these, again, could end very, very badly. They don't seem like easy solutions. We spoke about how Clinton did many people regard it as deliberate diversion. He attacked that pharmaceutical plant in Sudan, but nothing came of it. There wasn't any risk, there wasn't any blowback. But the things, again, we're talking about real wars against formidable opponents. And if you want to go and, if, for the sake of diversion, escalate in one of these regions or one of these battlefields, the consequences could be terrible. In the end, it could backfire, and he's got to consider that. I really don't know where he's got an easy out, but again, the people around him, they're in all these different conflicts. There's always a group of people within the administration that want to escalate, and they understand the situation that Trump is in, and they come to him and say, "Hey, we've got this great plan. It's surefire. It's going to work. You're going to be a hero, just like with your the B-2 attack on the nuclear facilities in Iran. That was in fact a disaster, but he could play it as a tremendous victory, and that's what he still thinks it is. We've got another plan like that, here in Ukraine. You give them these missiles and whatever, and you'll prove that you're tougher than Biden, and you'll put pressure on Putin, and it'll bring him to the table. Now, of course, it won't do those things, but he could be talked into it. They understand where, his fears, his concerns, his desire to extricate himself from this mess that he's gotten himself over Epstein. And they can use that as leverage to get him to do what they've always wanted to do all along. And we've seen Trump fall for these things in the past. I think we saw that happen, like in the case of Iran. So there's always these, and it could happen again, in the case of Iran. So there are these dangers, right? He makes himself vulnerable. He finds himself in a mess. He's subjected to these pressures domestically, and that makes himself vulnerable to these various factions within the Hawkish factions within the U.S. government and within his own administration.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if everybody thinks that Trump is a pedophile, if they just have that idea, you would do anything to shake it. I'm just thinking if I was Trump, right, and people are like Mr. President, like, yeah, everybody thinks they're a pedophile. It's like, oh my God, what do you got to do? It's like, well, give me my options. Blow up the world. Good. Okay, do that one. Whatever. I don't care. Just push the button. Get rid of this. Whatever. I'm serious. Like, it is a very scary situation.
Right. Any normal person, and by the way, I don't think Trump is a pedophile. But yeah, but any normal human being does not. The last thing that he wants to be, to be thought of, as the last sort of label that he wants attached to himself is the pedophile label. And right, you're going to fight tooth and nail to keep that off of you. Right.
Right. So, I mean, then release the files, have complete transparency. The reason they're not is because obviously they have to have some dirt on him or people that he was trying to protect or something.
Well, maybe,
that is clearly,
maybe not. Right.
I'm not saying that he is.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I understand.
But,
I think that's part of it. In fact, there have been a lot of leaks that, he's in the files, though nobody's claiming that he did anything illegal. But it's clear that he was very closely associated with Epstein. You see pictures of him, and partying. And there was that kind of somewhat suggestive letter that, that he sent to Epstein that was published by the Wall Street Journal. So there's clearly some dirt. Again, I don't think it rises to the level of a crime. But it's something.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, maybe not. But in any case, let's just, for the sake of argument, say it doesn't. You just don't. It's a very bad look. You find out that you were, very closely connected with Epstein, and maybe you didn't actually sleep with an underage girl provided by him, but you slept with a bunch of 18 and 19-year-olds provided by him. It just looks bad, right? I don't know. or also that you knew stuff was going on. And I think that's probably true. Everybody, why was it called the Lolita Express, right? And you were with them for all those years and you knew these things were going on. You have evidence of that. That's bad. That's going to hurt you, even more. So there may be things like that. But it's not just that. Maybe that's not what's keeping them from opening the files. The other thing is the Israeli intelligence, the Mossad connection, which we don't know for a fact is there, but it sure looks like it's there. There's very, very strong reason to suspect, to believe that it's there. And if it's there, it's just, that's a no-no. You do not shine a light on those connections. That's the sacred bond, the sacred relationship that must be preserved at all costs, the relationship between the U.S. and Israel.
So war it is, right? It sounds like that's because we can't come clean and we want to protect pedophiles, we'll start war, because we care more about making sure our pedophiles stay safe and are in charge of the world. It's just so sick. It's so gross. I just feel like we're in big trouble. So, okay, well then what do you think is most likely? I'll give you three options here. That the U.S. gives long-range missiles to Ukraine and we begin firing missiles deep into Russia, potentially Moscow, St. Petersburg, or Israel or the United States, start bombing Iran, or there's going to be de-escalation and we'll somehow just get out of this mess without blowing up. What do you choose? Which happens first, if anything?
That's a rough one. It's who knows, but okay. Yeah, I think the real extremists or let's say the greater concentration of extremists are found with regard to Israel. The Israel firsters, the Iran haters, they're there and they've already done their damage, and I'm sure they're going to do more damage. That pressure is not going to go away. Now, I don't think you find the same kind of zeal, with regard to Russia. But there's some pretty intense Russian haters there. Maybe I'm actually underestimating the level of, Russophobia that you find in the administration. But, for the time being, they're holding off. Apparently there was some kind of push to go to the long-range missiles, and for the time being appears that's not going to happen. But that pressure is there, it seems to be building. And the thing is, just as the Russians continue to make their advances, and I think, we may be looking, you just never know, we thought that maybe we were at a certain, right on the point of collapse probably 6 months ago or even a year ago. And it turned out, no, the fight continues the war continues to be a war of attrition. But every war of attrition does end in collapse. And when the collapse happens, it may not be overnight. It might be over the course of a couple of months, but that is going to be very alarming. And that's when those people, the Russia haters, the people that are obsessed with maintaining this image of invincibility, are going to regard this as the Ukraine war, as existential. They will see that they will be willing to take great risks. They do already regard it as an existential, and if a collapse begins to occur, they're going to be willing to take risks or that they weren't willing to take before, or to push hard for some escalations that they really didn't push that hard for before, because they'll feel that, their backs will be against the wall and they're going to fight. And then Trump himself is going to feel cornered. He doesn't want to have another Afghanistan debacle, pinned on him. That's the last thing he wants. He's going to look weak. People are going to blame him. They're going to say that, look, this is happening because, you were, unlike Biden, you attached all these conditions and you really didn't provide the full support that Ukraine required. So he's going to feel those pressures. They're going to go after him. These people around him are going to be, desperate. It's just like they're going to see the rules-based international order collapsing before their eyes. Just as Ukraine collapses, their beloved international rules-based order is going to collapse as well. And that's, I don't think they're going to just cry like that, the organizer of the Munich conference did. It's going to be, we have to bring out the big guns. We've actually been too restrained. That's, I think, maybe the way they think, because that's the way they've thought all along. We'll have to go to the tomahawk, or at least, the extended range JASSM. We're going to have to strike, make it really hurt. We're going to, a missile to St. Petersburg or a missile to Moscow. And because, clearly the Russians don't understand anything else. They only understand force. And, if we don't stop them now, it's going to be the end of our, our beloved NATO, the end of this world order. And, that's nothing that they're going to let go of easily. They're just not going to, at least I don't think so. Some of them are going to do reckless things. So it could happen in other places. We have the crazies already in the Middle East, and they've already done their damage, and they'll do it again. But we've had these people that have been pushing for escalation. And they're going to keep on pushing. And when the situation becomes desperate, they're going to push extra hard, and we may really see those missiles to Moscow.
Okay, right. So the question that I posed was do you think that it's going to be Ukraine long-range missiles, or, the United States and Israel attacking Iran? And you started by saying that, okay, the most likely one will be Iran. But then you were able to explain very eloquently for 5-10 minutes on how it's going to happen in Ukraine as well. So to me, it sounds like you're saying both are happening. It's very plausible. Both of these situations, I just feel like if it's true, basically you're saying that, okay, yeah, both wars are highly probable to start. Nobody's painting me pictures of plausible off ramps. Nobody tells me that, yeah, we can de-escalate. It just isn't on the table. It just seems like we only have one gear, and it's escalation in both of these conflicts. And then we have the fact that Trump is embroiled in this scandal, and he needs to do anything to divert his attention. It just sounds like we are heading straight along into this. But if that's true, this is really likely, if what we're saying is actually true, that this could happen, we should all be screaming from the rooftops, right? This could be the end of the world, right? And this isn't hyperbole. If we get into a direct confrontation with Russia, or even with what's going to might happen with Iran, with the close of the Strait of Hormuz, chaos is going to spread. But I feel like nobody is acting like that's going to happen. It just seems like it's impossible. You're just fear mongering. These are just doomsayers. But whenever we have these conversations, I'm like, oh my God, this could actually happen. But even myself, I go get in my car and buy groceries for the week. I'm not stocking up and getting a generator and prepping, but maybe I should. Or maybe I pack up my family and, move to South Africa or something. If I truly was thinking that a nuclear war is possible or imminent, or World War III, I feel like I should be making these moves. But even myself, when I have these conversations, I don't do anything because I'm like, there's just no way, right? No way. But I just got to watch it and just respond as it evolves. But then I don't want to wait till all of a sudden I'm like, oh, damn it. Whoops, here it comes. Didn't buy my bunker,
Right. Well, yeah, I don't know what to say. I'm not going to give advice on stocking up and, digging holes in your backyard or anything. I'm not saying any advice one way or the other. But probably it won't happen. I think it's still, the horror of nuclear war. It's the destruction that could be unleashed is such that it, so far for a good, 80 years, it has prevented any country from taking that step. Right. Since 1945, we haven't seen it happen. There was the dawn of the atomic age then, and there was a great deal of fear, which is very well placed. We have this enormous, this incredibly destructive new weapon that has been unleashed, and it's now in the hands of sinful humanity. But just the knowledge of its destructiveness has prevented it from being used, and maybe that will continue to prevent it from being used. but there is, there is a reason to be afraid. Um, and I think, first of all, it's just the cavalier attitude and the maybe again, the lack of alarm, which you were just pointing out. Again, as I remember, as a kid and as a young man, fear of nuclear war was real. People talked about it. People were genuinely worried about it. And it was something that was discussed, in the public forum, that was debated. And because we took it seriously, well, you could say we did the responsible thing, and we signed these treaties with the Soviet Union, and by doing so, we greatly reduced the chance of nuclear war. Now, these treaties have, one after another, have expired or have been broken. The last one, and maybe the most important start, is already it's parts of certain provisions are no longer being observed by the parties, and it's due to expire, I believe, what is it, next year? And there's just not even a talk of renewing it. And then, more than that, again, it's just, okay, the treaties that protected us are ceasing to exist. We don't have that protection. But more importantly, that fear, and that very healthy fear, seems to be gone. Instead, the attitude in the West is that raising the specter of nuclear war is just a Russian talking point, because that helps Putin, right? Everything is reduced to this. It's just like, again, it's another example of how we no longer live in the real world, but we live in the world of narratives. Okay, and the narrative is that Putin is evil, and that he's, anything that he says is just part of some sort of diabolical scheme to get us to accede to his demands. And so if the Russians say, hey, there's a real danger of nuclear war here, it's just like Russian talking point. We're not listening. Yeah, it's all a bluff. And you say, well, in the past, you would hear something like that and say, maybe it's a bluff, but there's a small chance that it's true. And that small chance has to be considered and actually has to be feared, because the consequences are so huge. But we just don't get that, very realistic kind of adult, mature response that we had in the past. The response is cavalier. The response is somebody who doesn't really have a firm grip on reality, doesn't really believe in reality anymore. Everything's about narratives. So that does make me worried. We just don't. We have a real conflict in Europe that's escalating. We don't have that healthy fear. We don't have the treaties. Yeah, there's reasons to be afraid that something could go wrong. Maybe in the end, it's just like, well, people will wake up, from this kind of self-imposed delusion, and say, hey, we can't do this. Nuclear war is a really bad idea. Maybe we'll go all the way to the edge. Maybe we'll go just, we'll do the JASSMs or something, but not the extended range, and then they're thinking about the tomahawks, and the people, in the administration are making the arguments for them and striking Moscow and making Putin really feel the pain, so-called Putin, when, it'll be real Russians that are going to die. And then maybe at that point, I just hope, maybe I'm a fool, but just hope against hope that they'll say, hey, yeah, we can't do this, guys. Let's see, nuclear war is real, and, it could be the end of us all. Or even if it's not the end of us all, it could be tens of millions of dead people, hundreds of millions, who knows? Let's not do this. And then perhaps we say, okay, let's fold it in. Let's fold it up. Let's go home. Let's do something else. That may happen, but it's just like, you feel like you can't really count on that, right?
No, yeah, no, I don't feel reassured at all. You're going to say, why nuclear war or World War III won't happen. And the problem is, I say World War III or nuclear war, but in my mind, if there is a real war with the West, with NATO, it's going to have to go nuclear, because we don't have the capability to fight a war. And I think that's what makes it so scary, is that the reality is that NATO is not capable of waging a conventional war. And people can cry all they want about it, but it's just true. We just do not have the industrial capacity to wage a conventional war. We are already desperately low on pretty much everything across the board, from artillery shells to ATACMs to Patriot interceptors to THAADs. Like, I heard it's going to take 10 years to replace the amount of THAADs that we used to protecting Israel. And that was just 12 days. So this whole thing, like, if we want to go to war, it's going to be the option is nuclear, because we're already at the limit where it's like, what do we have? JASSMs and Tomahawks, long range. And then even when you're firing Tomahawks, Russia, knows that these are nuclear capable weapons. So that's real risky. I just don't. Yeah. Every time I try to ask you, like, okay, maybe I'm being irrational, walk us back how this is not going to happen. You always say, like, yeah, it's probably not going to happen. Then you proceed to explain exactly how I think it's going to happen, that we move up the side. And I'm like, well, now I don't feel safe.
Yeah, I know. I again, perhaps, again, I'm naive and I'm just, foolishly optimistic. I don't think it's going to happen, but you have to admit that the situation is scary. It really is scarier than it ever has been since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I think people who really, who look at these things closely agree it is. I know, what is it that, for whatever it's worth, there's that doomsday clock, right? That is showing that I think it's closer to midnight. Midnight means, nuclear Armageddon. It's closer to midnight than it has been, I think, ever since this was started. That may not mean anything, but it shows that there are others, it's not just a few weird guys with podcasts that are talking about this. That's what people who analyze these kind of things for a living are seeing. There are some very disturbing trends. The fact, again, just the treaties we're talking, and the introduction of these new, of hypersonic missiles. Again, the West hasn't caught up with that, but I'm assuming that they will. And then if you have hypersonic missiles, installed in Europe, they can strike Moscow in, 5 minutes or something like that. It just puts, that just gives no chance. There's just no margin for error. The Russians see a missile, or they believe that, a missile's coming at them, a hypersonic missile, and it's heading right for Moscow. What are they supposed to do? They have to make a decision within just a couple of minutes. Do we assume this is nuclear or not? It just puts the whole world on right there on
hair trigger.
On the hair trigger, exactly. That's what these treaties were supposed to prevent. That's why we had the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, and that has expired. The U.S. just simply abrogated it. So that's. But we need to bring those back. We need to start. Really. I think what happened actually was with on the Western side is that they became so arrogant. There's assumption that, again, we don't really need to constrain ourselves. We can simply do what we want, and then Russia will have to accept the consequences. And we are the superior side. And, we don't want to, when you sit down at the negotiating table and then you work out a treaty, you're actually and you're recognizing the legitimacy of the other side, and you also are just showing some respect for their strength. This is something that we need to do for our mutual benefit, and these negotiations will treat yourselves as equals. That's what negotiations have to be based on, that on mutual benefit and the principle of essentially equality. We abandoned that. Again, I think it's a product of the hyperpolar, the unipolar moment is what I mean to say. Our experience of being the hyperpower. There's just no need to constrain ourselves in any way. But in the end, it was very foolish. It was just like when we ripped up those treaties, the Russians said, okay, well, we're going to have to develop some new weapons. They went ahead and developed them, and that we haven't, So now they're actually in the driver's seat. It was very, very foolish. But they would be willing if we said, okay, let's sit down and let's negotiate a treaty. Now, the problem is, like, the Russians actually pulled out a part of the start because of the proxy war in Ukraine. You say, it does not make sense, they said, if you are actually engaged in hostile actions against us, for us to observe this treaty, or certain parts of it. By doing so, you essentially have violated the treaty, because the treaty is, the basis of the treaty is that we actually we're not engaged in hostilities against each other. The treaty is supposed to prevent that, but you are engaging in hostilities against us. You are using Ukraine as a proxy against us. And in fact, you've gone beyond, of course, that happened later with the attacks and direct attacks on Russia. So, if we're going to negotiate these treaties, first of all, we're going to have to settle the war in Ukraine and stop using Ukraine as a proxy. That's the first step. And then, we can try to rebuild. We can try to create these, these protections that once exist, and to recreate them, establish new ones that have to deal with new technologies. And we're just we're close to doing that now. We're actually headed in the opposite direction. So yeah, again, I guess whenever I say I don't think it's going to happen, then I point out that it's sort of like, right. I don't know. We're going down a mountain road, and the brakes start going out. And I say, well, I think we're going to make it to the bottom. You're a real good driver or whatever, but there's reasons to be pretty scared.
Do you think Trump's a really good driver if we're in the car with him, though? That's what's so scary, right?
Yeah, right.
It's like,
right. No, it is scary. It probably is not fair to call him a warmonger. I don't think he really is, but he is very susceptible. He clearly can be persuaded by these people around him who are warmongers. And as we said earlier, the fact that he's been weakened by this domestic scandal makes him more vulnerable to their persuasions.
The thing that's strange is that when we talk about the Cold War, there was this healthy fear of nuclear war, and that's what produced all these treaties. And now you're saying that, not just, crazies all doing podcasts talking about the threat of nuclear war, but experts have put the clock as close to midnight as it's ever been to nuclear war. But there is no healthy fear of it. Even amongst, like what I was just saying, even amongst us that are aware of the problem. I don't feel like we are acting like people that are, if the clock is really that close to midnight, why aren't we behaving differently? I don't know if part of it is just that we can't even countenance the idea of nuclear war because we have mad mutually assured destruction, or that because of the hyperpower has led to this mentality that we can't even countenance the concept of us not being able to impose our will in any way. So we're just lulled into this strange state of mind where all the evidence is pointing as that we are getting very close to a very dangerous situation, but nobody's behaving like it's a dangerous situation.
No, I think that's true. I mean, within the dissident community, and I think probably you have to, I think the one who has been ringing this alarm bell the loudest is Scott Ritter. This is something
Scott. We need more Scott.
Yeah. I mean, that's something he does very well. He was a weapons inspector. He was involved in actually in formulating and implementing these treaties in the past. So that's something where he really knows what he's talking about, and he has been raising the alarm bells. But yeah, again, it's just you do not find it within the establishment, and I think it is just this smugness on one side, and it's just also this. Again, it's a victory of the narrative over reality. And in the narrative, talking about the threat of nuclear war, that helps the Russians, so we don't talk about it. So, that's what happens. And if you bring it up, you're obviously working for the Kremlin, which is just absurd. It's just like a healthy fear of nuclear war is not a Russian talking point. I think Tom Woods said that very well. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, once again, every time we try to find some peace of mind, you convince me that we're heading towards something maybe scarier.
Yeah, again, you're right. There's nothing inevitable. It's not like, this is maybe where sometimes I will disagree with Scott Ritter. It's like he talks, well, if this happens, then definitely there'll be nuclear war. There's always agencies. There's always agency, there's free will, and people can pull back from the abyss. And maybe that's what I'm relying on. Maybe I'm relying on that too much, that in the end, when we stare into the abyss, we'll pull back. I guess one thing that I do worry about
will.
Yeah.
Go on. Sorry.
Okay, well, one thing I do worry about is actually if we were conventionally stronger, then I would be less worried about it. But as you pointed out, it's just that our conventional weaponry has been so depleted, and it's also proved to be, much less effective than we had previously imagined. And so, again, like our missile force, our conventional missile force, we talk about the Tomahawk and, a few other systems. But we've seen these other systems, like the ATACMS, they've just been almost entirely neutralized by the Russians. And probably, the Tomahawks they'll learn how to neutralize that too. But the Russians really have taken the lead in missile technology. They have the hypersonics, they have the Zircon and the Kinjal, and they have their Iskander has been modified so that it's just virtually impossible to shoot down at this point. It's faster. It has a stealth coating. It takes these evasive maneuvers at the end. It drops decoys, and the Ukrainians themselves are admitting they just can't shoot it down. So they have these very advanced systems, which they've perfected through the war. And then they have, of course, the Reshnik. So they have this very powerful conventional, missile force, very powerful. So they have a lot of options before going nuclear. And we just don't. And that kind of puts it like if you don't have the conventional force, but you still have, hundreds of nuclear warheads, then the temptation to go nuclear is greater. So you just look at the kind of the structure of incentives or just the weapons that are at our disposal. If you very quickly we can find ourselves in a situation where we realize we just really don't have anything to stop the Russian march to the west of Ukraine or whatever it is that's causing everyone to shriek. We don't have, we don't have the conventional alternative. And then you say, well, we do have nuclear. Maybe we could do something like a tactical nuclear. We won't actually have a nuclear war, but, the temptation. And you just know that some of these crazies are going to be arguing. This is what we can't have to do. If we don't, it's like the end of American hegemony. They may not use those actual words, but that's what they're thinking. So, I'm sorry. I still, I guess, I may be convincing. I was trying to feel.
We're so screwed.
Yeah, well, I guess the more I think about it, the more the reasons are worried. I'm right. Sorry.
Yeah, and you talk about, I was going to say, you're talking about these people having agency and free will. It's like, well, there's this question on how true that is. If there is real blackmail on someone like Trump, it's like, well, how much agency does he really have? And then, even if his instincts are to avoid nuclear war, well, if it's his legacy and his ego at stake, you'll try to find any way out to, like, maybe I can get the best of both worlds. I can be the Winston Churchill, as well. It's like, and then
I don't see how he would be blackmailed into doing it, because, if there's blackmail, it's probably going to be like Mossad, and it's going to, if we see action as a result of direct blackmail, it's probably going to be in the Middle East. Again, I'm not saying that it's going to happen, but if it's going to be blackmail, that's where it's going to be. But just finding himself, like his approval numbers are plummeting, his own base is turning against him, and he knows, he's just. So these guys come and say, hey, I've got this great plan. You're going to be a hero. Just like you're going to be a hero. You're going to be the next Winston Churchill. This is going to be, and everybody's going to stop talking about Epstein, and they're going to be singing your praises. They're going to be building statues to you. You're going to be the next face on Mount Rushmore. You know how they're going to go after him. And it just, you're right. The more the worse the domestic scandals get, the lower his his approval rating is, the more likely, the more vulnerable he is to that kind of pressure.
Right. Right. The lower his approval rating go, we can look at that kind of the threshold for acceptance of engaging in some type of thing is lowered as well. So, it's terrifying. I don't know if you've seen, I just saw this morning on ROT that, oh wait, what was the story? My mind just went blank. Oh yes. It was about that Trump is reducing that 50-day threshold that he imposed on on Russia, saying that you have 50 days to come with a deal before, I don't know, secondary tariff sanctions, escalation of something. And then he just said like, oh, that number is going to be shorter now. Why do you think he's saying that? Is that a sign that Ukraine is collapsing and that he is feeling he needs to intervene earlier because he can't wait that long?
I don't know. I've been asked about that 50-day number, and I think it's something he just pulled out of a hat. I don't know if there's any reason, and who knows why he said he was going to make it happen sooner. Perhaps he just thought it sounded tough. I'm not sure that there was any serious thought behind it. It's amazing, actually, how little people believe, that he's actually going to make good on these threats. It seems like the Chinese, the Russians, the Indians, they just seem to be completely unfazed by this. And you can see it by, the fact that the markets aren't in turmoil. If it was expected that we're going to go right back into another economic war with China, remember the markets were in turmoil when he actually launched that war. And that turmoil, I think, is what brought him to his senses. And so, he rolled back the tariffs. They're still pretty high, but they're much, much lower than where he had them, from 145% to 30%, right, for China. And he's going to go back and do that again? I don't think so. Again, the markets don't think he's going to do so, and including also the oil futures market. If the people who trade oil, this is what making predictions about the future is. That's their living. That's how they make their money. These are the guys. They have the money riding on it. They have every reason to get it right. They need to. They do the research. Oil prices aren't spiking. There's just you don't see it happening. Nobody thinks it's going to happen. Nobody believes them. So it just seems to be an empty threat. And I just don't think. I mean, if he goes ahead and does it, it's going to be suicidal, I think. It's going to be he's going to be shooting himself in the foot, and he'll have to back down. It'll be a real disaster for him.
Yeah, I mean, it's just such a bad look on Trump as well, because, the whole justification for bombing Iran is that, I gave a 60-day timeline. And then on day 61, while negotiations were still scheduled with the United States, he does this attack. Right. And now he's like, okay, I'll do another deadline, 50 days. Now he just immediately changes it. And he does this with so many other numbers. So it's just like, you just don't know. I'm kind of... but like you said, Trump is kind of out of options. I feel like, and if he's talking a lot with people like, Lindsey Graham and that Blumenthal character, it's like, maybe he will, I mean, it seems like Graham does have his ear, and that guy is just insane. He's just a complete madman.
He's really excited, right? He just seems to be, he's in a state of great, excitement over this. This is something that he feels like this is a dream come true for him. We're now going to really take it to the Russians and the Chinese, right? And we're going to make them pay. We're going to make them hurt. And we're going to, I guess in his mind, we're reestablishing, American hegemony. It was those weak Democrats, that have allowed those tin pot dictators to defy our power. And now we're going to let them know who's boss. Bone crushing sanctions. We're going to restore, fear, abject fear of the United States again. He's quite excited about this. But it's just like the people who have the money riding on it don't believe it's going to happen, and I don't believe it's going to happen either. If they do, if they're so foolish enough, like you say, if he actually really believes Lindsey Graham, and what Lindsey Graham claims that he got 81 senators to sign up to his bill, of course Trump is we're not talking about the bill as sort of his own version of it, but the bill is there still in the background. Um, yeah, it just seems to me incredible.
Kind of
that you have
hoping.
81. I mean, the fact that you have 81 senators who actually thought that this was a sensible thing to do, it just tells you just how stupid the people are that run this country, or how abysmally ignorant they are. They have just so little understanding of markets and of other countries, and they shouldn't be running a great country like ours, but they are.
Right. Once again, we're so screwed, right? It's 81 senators out of 100 are on board for something this idiotic and suicidal. Then, we're in trouble. But part of me is actually hoping that this does happen, because this could potentially, bring down the empire without going nuclear, without a huge war. I feel like, okay, just do the sanctions. Russia isn't afraid of it. China's not afraid of it. No, India's not afraid of it. Just do it. It'll make America look really stupid and really weak. And then maybe we'll be able to, shake some reality into our leaders and say, like, hey, you don't get to dictate reality around the world anymore. Take care of your own damn country. There's a lot of problems here. Just focus on home, okay? Like, I hopefully we can shake shake some sense into them when that happens. So do it, I say.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Again, there you have it. There's a relatively rosy scenario. We don't have to. It doesn't have to end in nuclear holocaust. Yeah. Right. Maybe there's.
Did it.
Right. Exactly.
Economic collapse, hooray, and our ticket out.
Right, yeah. I would go for economic collapse any day. That gives us a chance, like you say, to reassess and maybe to just turn around the ship of state and head off in a much more reasonable direction.
Okay, well, let's all pray for global financial crisis, economic collapse, and get out of this. Well, just to think, I was thinking about Lindsey Graham. We were talking about his posture on Russia. I mean, he's even worse when it comes to the Middle East, when it comes to Israel. It's just he had some statement earlier just saying, which I don't even understand what this means. He was saying that, well, first, Trump said something that they need to finish the job in Gaza, which is quite ominous sounding. Mm-hmm. And then Lindsey Graham was saying that Israel needs to do to Gaza what we did to Berlin and Tokyo, which I'm like, well, okay, first of all, we firebombed Tokyo, destroyed it, bombed Berlin, did a lot of damage.
Yeah,
but actually, compared to the damage of Gaza's... Sorry?
Actually, we really didn't do much to Berlin. That was the Soviets. The Battle of Berlin.
Right, I know the Soviets marched in.
Right. Yeah. But anyway, definitely Tokyo. The firebombing of Tokyo was horrific, and it was nearly as bad as what happened in Nagasaki and Hiroshima.
Right, but I mean, like Gaza is completely destroyed. So what is he talking about? And this was a huge war where there's so much damage and suffering on all sides, all around. And here we just have one group that is pummeling a captive population and that has already reduced the whole place to rubble. And now they're starving them to death. And the pictures that are coming out are just so horrific. So it's just like, what is their plan? It just seems to be extermination. It just seems to be becoming so openly genocidal that I feel like, how it's gotten too bad. It's been horrible for over a year and a half now, but it's just gotten to the point where I think when we're seeing these images of kids starving to death, it's so horrific, so heartbreaking. I just don't see how, but then you get these comments saying finish the job. And then, we need to do what we did like in Tokyo, Berlin. It's like, what are we saying here? Are they advocating now? How close are we getting to saying like, we just got to kill them all? Like that just feels like where we're heading. It's just...
No, I think it's very close to that. And I think there's no question about it. We do get statements like that from Israeli leaders. Essentially, we got to kill them all. And again, we get poll results that show what a majority of Jewish Israelis essentially agree with that. They should be given the Amalek treatment, which is to say, really kill them all. And then a greater majority is that we got to drive them all out. If we don't kill them all, whoever remains should be just pushed out into the Sinai Desert or something. But Yeah. Anyway, what was I going to say? I forget. There was.
I I don't remember, but I just it just made me think of something because I was listening to Alistair Crook on Judge Knapp right before this, and he said
Uh-huh.
something that I wanted to ask you about. He said that
Okay.
there are many people within Israel now are appalled by the starvation of children. And I don't know if
Hmm.
that's true. I want to believe it's true because if
Hmm.
anybody sees these pictures, like if you think that that's okay, it's just then that person doesn't
Hmm.
have any humanity. Like it's
Right.
so terrible, just so awful. And just think about all these kids that are dying and will die because of this, or just will be permanently
Yeah.
damaged. And if anybody has children, or just as a human being, it's just so unacceptable. And so you just
Yeah.
think that you
Right.
would hope that if any
Right.
population was shown this, they would say this is
Yeah.
abhorrent. But I just don't believe that within Israel. And maybe I'm wrong, and maybe he's
Yeah.
right that there
Yeah.
are a growing number of people that are truly appalled, but they're not holding their government accountable from what I see so
Right.
far. And I don't. You read
Right.
Haaretz regularly. Are you seeing any
Right.
sign that there is a growing movement?
Well, it has to be said that Haaretz has always given a voice to those people who, yeah, regard this as a genocide and are horrified at it, and are, Gideon Levy is a good example, but he's not the only one. So Gideon Haaretz, not all of Haaretz by a long shot, but there are some writers within Haaretz who have always, been fully aware and have not hesitated to describe the horror that's going on in Gaza. But they are, I think, again, the polls have showed. I haven't seen very recent polls, but it's just like the percentage of the population that actually is directly concerned, is appalled by this, and wants the war to end because of it, is tiny. The last thing I think there was a poll. This was probably from several months ago, where only 2% of Jewish Israelis thought that too much was being done. Just 2%. And most of them thought that not enough was being done. Um, that's horrifying. But I think it's probably also true from what I hear that there are more, though the numbers are very tiny, the numbers are increasing within Israel. And interestingly, even some like Israeli generals and a former president, Ehud Barak, who was connected to Jeffrey Epstein, by the way, was actually a close
Right.
friend of him. But let's set that aside, okay? But he actually wrote some piece describing his horror at what was going on, and he was ringing the alarm bells. It's like Israel is in mortal danger because of what it has done. So, I mean, he was saying like the kind of things that you say. If people think that Charlie here is being too extreme and is just kind of going off the deep end on this, no, he was saying the same things. And he said, we got to have some kind of civil disobedience movement right now. This guy is no dovish leftist extreme radical, but he seems to have understood what this was doing to Israel. And we got to stop it, if we want to salvage Israel, if we want to have any hope for Israel's future, because Israel has become an international pariah. This is what Ehud Barak was saying, former president of Israel. So
Right.
there are some important voices, and that is a hopeful sign, but we're still talking about tiny numbers out on the fringe. And these people are generally, whenever they say things like that, they're roundly attacked. I talked about that woman on TV. She finally said, look, I know you guys don't want to hear this, but another reason to stop this war is actually the suffering of the Palestinians. And that drew gasps. How can you say that? And it shows you where Israel is. And then recently there was an anti-war rally. You say, oh, great, an anti-war rally in Israel. And I think there was, in Tel Aviv, I think there were maybe 100,000 or more people. It drew a lot of people. And I was looking at, oh, interesting, maybe something's really changing. But what you found is that overwhelmingly it was about the hostages and the poor IDF soldiers. And there were some, leftists there that were trying to say, hey, we got to talk about the Palestinians. And they would shout, shame, shame, look at the genocide. But they were always shouted down. They were kept away from the podium. And so, even the so-called anti-war movement is overwhelmingly makes a point of ignoring the suffering of the Palestinians. Again, there are those brave exceptions, and they appear to be growing, but they're not having any impact on policy there.
It's so damning. if you have a population that is aware of what's happening in Gaza and they are supporting the starvation of millions of women and children, it's just, I just wonder what's going to happen. If you had, because I don't think that's ever happened before, where you had such a large population where the civilian population was openly supportive of extermination. Because this wasn't how it worked in Germany. The Germans, before the average citizen wasn't aware of what was going on in these camps. And I mean, the Germans were suffering horrifically as well. Millions and millions of Germans have already died, and there are shortages of food and all things throughout the country. It was all bad. But here you have just this population where they're posting pictures, all the time, like, look, we're dancing again. We love Tel Aviv. That we're having, look at us enjoying life, and then just right across, they're just deliberately starving of people, and they're just like, it's there, It's never, of course, it's never acceptable. Yeah, go ahead.
Because actually they're often ridiculing them. They're actually dressed up. Oh, I'm a starving Palestinian. Ha 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 ha. This kind of stuff. They're making a joke out of it. This was something that actually John Mearsheimer pointed out. There was I forget the name of the woman that interviewed him. I saw this a few days ago, but she pointed out that there was a difference. You may have heard the phrase banality of evil. This was okay. I'm so terrible right now at the moment. The woman that wrote this very, very famous book, a Jewish woman, by the way, that described Nazi evil. The banality of evil. It's just sort of like really faceless bureaucrats. I think this was kind of her main point. And Mearsheimer said, there's something different. There's almost a certain glee that they're taking in the suffering that they're perpetrating. He said, Mearsheimer studied World War II very carefully, of course, being a military historian. That's part of who he is, a military political scientist. And what you get the sense with the Germans, is that they understood what they were doing was wrong. And they try to keep it hidden from their own people and from the world, and some extent even from themselves. But you see something different in Israel. You just like again, these guys with the selfies celebrating what they're doing, or we've also seen, people like setting up their lawn chairs close to the Gaza border and eating popcorn and celebrating the bombing raids. And they know what's happening. These civilian lives are being extinguished, but they observe it. They know what's happening, and they actually are gleeful about it. So, rather than the Hannah Arendt. Okay, Hannah Arendt is the one who came up with this phrase, the banality of evil. So instead of the banality of evil, you have just like the gleefulness of evil.
It's horrifying. Yeah, I think it was Matt Ho I was listening to a while ago, just about the sort of genocide tourism, where people, they do field trips with kids to go watch the bombings. You can do boat tours and see it, and there'd be concerts where they time up the music with bombs going off in Gaza. It's just, it's crazy. It's just so crazy. So we haven't had this where just the population is aware of it and supporting it and wants it to continue. It just makes me wonder, eventually, this is so damning to the state of Israel that, even if they exterminate everybody in Gaza, Israel is done for this action, and everybody's looking at them with complete horror and disgust. And this will, so in some ways, shape or form, and I hope it doesn't end with the Samson option, but the state of Israel can't survive. Something this evil can't exist. The world will reject it. And then when it does, what happens to these people? Because it's not like, Nazi Germany where, the war was over and, this was still Germany. They get to live there and then they become aware of what their government was doing, and they can say like, oh my goodness, this was terrible, and learn from it. Here, you were aware of it. And when the state of Israel ends, what's going to happen to these people? Where are they going to go back? Are they going to go back to the Ukraine? Are they going to go back to Russia, Poland, to New York? And will they be accepted, or will they move somewhere else? And what will happen to them if they were part of this state that was just openly part of genocide and eventually collapsed because of all of the atrocities and evil it has perpetrated. So then what happens to these people? Can people accept them? Will there be trials for them? Are they allowed to be back in society, or will they take over Cyprus? That's a fear that I think if I was Cyprus, I might be a little bit worried, like, so, how does that, it's such a strange thing because
I don't. Right. No. It's just like I can see, though I earlier laid out the reasons to be very, very concerned about what's going to happen in Ukraine. There's dangerous, very scary days ahead. I think there's no question about it. And the chance, I don't think we really are looking like the chance of some sort of nuclear conflagration in the Middle East. Nuclear weapons might be used, but I think it'll be regionally. It's bad enough. I'm not trying to downplay this, but a general, true World War III scenario, if that's going to happen, that's going to come out of Ukraine. And there is a reason to worry about it. We just laid it out in the earlier part of this episode. Yet I find it easier to picture, maybe not a good ending, but a less than catastrophic ending in Ukraine. It just, whenever I look at Israel and I think about all the different things that could happen, everything, looks bad. I just don't see a good ending. I don't see anything but a catastrophic ending in Ukraine. Not Ukraine, I'm sorry, in the Middle East.
In Israel.
In Palestine. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. It's just unbelievable to me, that we just have, the Jewish people finally have a state. It's like, oh, the only Jewish state, here it is. And then in less than 100 years, 80 years, we're at where we are now, where there's a genocide being created. It's so damning just for, there's a lot of great Jewish people that are speaking out against this, but more need to speak out, because you just have to realize how damning this is for your people, your religion. You have to distance yourself from this. You can't just distance. You have to condemn it. You have to say, because they are using your religion, your name, your people, and they're tarnishing it to a point where that it's just, I'm worried that the history, how we're going to look at this, and your people, it's like, you have to, embrace I know that in every religion there are good values that can provide some moral scaffolding. They need to find those, and they need to latch onto them, and they need to condemn them. And if they have want to hope to have any type of future for their people, this is destroying the Jewish people. It's so ironic. Like, we got the Jewish state. This is now everything is great for Jews and everything like this. And now look what you've done. Look what Israel's done to your people. And they, there needs to be a wake up, and kudos to all those brave Jews that are speaking out against Zionism.
Right. I think I heard actually a Jewish woman just this morning giving a speech saying very much the same thing as a Jewish woman. I need to say this. Because I'm Jewish, I need to tell you right now before we talk about it that I condemn what's going on there. This is evil. This is wrong. I completely, condemn the state of Israel for what it's doing. Kudos to them. It's hard. If you're part of a tribe, and all of us, or many of us in one way or another, kind of part of a tribe, it's hard to criticize your own tribe. Naturally, you're going to be reluctant to do that. So for those that have, and there are, many brave individuals who have done it in no uncertain terms, praise them. There need to be more. Exactly.
Amen. Okay. Is there anything else you want to cover, Dad, or should we end it there?
I think we should end it here. This is good.
Okay,
maybe
it's
not
good,
but I think
all right.
This is an ending.
Well, yeah. Thanks for a lot of cheery outlooks on the world. So, it's fascinating times, but scary times. And sometimes I need to just sort of pinch myself to think like, wait, is this all that's really happening? And yeah, it is. It is. Okay, Dad. Have a good rest of your evening, and I'll talk to you soon. Okay, bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.